In this video, we are going to talk about the reports that you as a charge nurse will be responsible for running at the beginning of your shift and at the end of your shift. To access these reports, we are going to go under the same tab for all of them, and that tab is your Facility tab. In your Facility tab, when you look at it, you will have a section titled Reports. When you're looking at the facility reports, you'll notice that there are quite a few to choose from. So we can get really specific with a lot of these reports, and you might not see all of the ones that I have on my screen here based off of your security template in Matrix. So the first one that we're going to look at is the report that you're going to run at the beginning of your shift, and that is going to be your facility activity report or your 24-hour report. To find that, we're going to scroll down until we find a section labeled Miscellaneous. And if you look, the names of each section are in these black bars, and they separate the reports based off of these categories. So in the miscellaneous section, the first one that you will see will be your facility activity report. We're going to select that. We're going to go down to the bottom. We're going to click Next. It's asking me for my start date and my end date. They're automatically going to offset to today's dates. What you need to do is go back 24 hours. So our start date, we're going to go back 1 day. The next thing it's asking you to do is choose from the following to display in the report. We have census, clinical coach, events, observations, orders, progress notes, and vital signs. To make sure that you don't miss anything, it is easiest just to click Select All. Now this is going to give you a lot of information in your report, but having too much information is never a bad thing when it comes to the care for our residents. So after I click Select All, the next line is asking me, do I want to include lines for additional notes? This part, when the report runs, will give you an additional set of lines below each resident, blank lines, where you can write documentation throughout your shift. That way, if you needed to write it on paper, on your cart, and then get back to the computer to input it, you could do so. The next thing is asking for our residents. You do not need to choose your residents out of this list if you choose your unit that you are working on. So I would just select the unit that I need. Down below, we have exclude residents with no changes. This would shorten your report. But if we do this, any resident that had no documentation within the past 24 hours that met any of this criteria up above, they would not show up on your report. And in doing that, you won't have the additional lines that we selected up here for that resident. So it's best just to leave all your residents on the report. That way you can chart and write down notes about each one of them if you need to. Next says include discharge, we do not need to do. Include outpatients, we don't need that as well. Show outpatients only, we do not need that. And sort by, you can go with resident or unit room and bed. Unit room and bed will make it much easier to track your residents as it will put them in order of their rooms. The next point, we would just click report and it would generate the report for us. What I'm going to do is bring up one that I already have just so we can look at the information that is in this report. So this is a facility activity report. My dates are a little bit different than what I had currently. I ran this a couple days ago. So if we look, here's our resident name, the unit room and the bed. And right now we start looking at the information that's below that resident. So right here we're looking at events that are open. If you remember our previous videos talking about events and observations, events are your hot charting. So this section right here talking about events open is going to show you who is on hot charting on your unit. That way you can do the proper follow-up. So if we're looking at this, the hot charting is for Medicare, but if I look over to the right-hand side, this hot charting had been closed, so it is no longer active. Observations that are incomplete, this will show anything that was incomplete within the past 24 hours of the date range that you gave. At this point, they have completed this observation. This part is very important as well. If anything shows up as incomplete in the observation section, you need to look at the creator and see if that is your name. And what incomplete will mean is that you have not finished filling out the assessment. Or maybe you did finish and answer all the questions in the assessment, but you did not hit complete on the assessment. Therefore, it would show up as incomplete, and we need to go back and complete that. It'll show any new orders that were put in for the resident, progress notes that were written in the past 24 hours, Here are the additional notes, or the additional lines that I was speaking about, where you could write information about your resident throughout your shift if you needed to. And then we would go down to the next resident. Notice that they are separated by this gray bar. So events that are open, this one we know for sure, there's hot charting, it's Medicare, and this is currently open, which means we need to chart on it if we were one of these shifts on one of these days. The second one is a non-pressure wound skin, right great toe. That one is open, so that would be the wound nurse that is going through and creating that event. Observations that are incomplete, so here is a good one. This one says in progress, and it is an IDT pain review. Pain review by 1/30/16. Okay, so that description right there tells me that they have until January 30th to complete this observation, which is why it would still be in progress. Again, below that, we get the progress notes, the additional notes, and then we would just keep working our way down that report. So this will show you all of your hot charting. It will show you any vitals that were out of range. It will show you all the progress notes from the previous shifts over the past 24 hours, your incomplete observations. So this would be your work list. You look at this at the beginning of your shift, and it tells you exactly who you need to chart on and why you need to chart on them. I'm going to go click back at the bottom here. The second report that you need to run at the beginning of your shift is the bowel management report. We are going to find that report under the resident info. If I look down here and if I move down my list, I see my resident bowel management report. I'll go down to the bottom and click next. End date would be today's date. Residents, again, I don't need to pick. If I select my unit, it will automatically pick my residents for that unit that are active. Include residents regardless of bowel alert status is an option that we could pick. Include acceptable ranges. And the duration, do I want to look at the last 7 days or the last 14 days? Typically, we look at the last 7. Sort by, again, resident name or unit, room, and bed. At this point, I would click report, and I would be able to see a report similar to this right here. So on this report, what it is going to show you is all the residents within the last 7-day period that have not had a BM recorded for a total of 3 days or more in a row. So if I'm looking right here, notice that my most recent date would be today, or the 25th, and it moves backwards to the left 7 days. So in this report, this resident right here had blanks on the 19th, the 20th, and the 21st. That is what triggered this report. Now, take into consideration, this resident might not have been admitted until the 22nd. Okay, so that follow-up would need to happen for us to figure out if this resident truly was not being documented on. If we look over there, we've got N. N would mean none. M is a medium, L would be a large, again none, a large, and then none. You'd be able to write comments over here to the right hand side. This resident right here, the second one, Mr. Edwards, if you look, the 25th, 24th, and the 23rd all were marked as none. So at this point, 3 days without a BM, we would start our BM protocol. That's how you read this report. It's important that we run this at the beginning so you know how to handle that resident on your shift and to see if we need any interventions related to their bowels. The next reports that we are going to look at are the reports that you are going to run at the end of your shift. The first one we're going to talk about is the point of care compliance report. So same place, facility reports, and if we come down, we're going to find a section titled point of care. And if we look in our point of care reports, we have one that is titled Point of Care Compliance. This report right here, as a charge nurse, needs to be ran. I would give yourself some time before the end of the shift, maybe an hour before the end of your shift. What it's going to show you are all the questions that your CNAs have not answered for the residents on your unit. So my start date and end date, for the POC MDS category, I would pick all. For the task category, for the vitals category, I would pick all. POC care needs sign off. We do not need to worry about that right now. Shift, you would pick the shift that you were working, your unit, and again, you don't need to pick the residents. questions to include, the incomplete questions only, sort by room and bed, and the print output, detail, and summary. So all that's fine. That's what we need. So all we did was select all, select all, select all, picked our shift, picked our unit. At this point, I would click report, and it would look something similar to this. So what it'll do is it'll break down my resident, and it will show me, there's my resident name, the category, and the questions that are incomplete. So at this point, the CNAs had not answered these questions about resident transferring, eating, using the toilet, and we keep on going down. You'll notice that it's a different resident in each one of these boxes. So the PM cares, toileting program, dinner, fluids, urine, bowel movement. So we can look at this to assess and figure out what our CNAs still need to document on. If this report was as extensive as this one, I would print it off, hand it to the CNA, and make sure that they know exactly who they still need to chart on. Now, the POC system, these residents would still have a red border, indicating that they still have questions that need answered. The next one that we're going to look at, if you are on EMAR, would be your EMAR compliance. So again, we're going to look at our different categories, and we come down here to the EMAR Administration Compliance Report in our EMAR section. This one for nursing is going to show you everything that you did not sign off on in EMAR that was assigned to your shift. So for our start date, we would always look at today. Again, we can bypass the residents once we pick the unit. Missed administrations, near misses, this would show anything that is currently late on the report. And at this point, as a charge nurse, that is all you have to do. We set our dates to just look at today. If you were night shift, your start date would be the date that your shift started, and the end date would be the date that your shift ended. So all we did was set our dates, pick our unit, and we're going to come all the way to the bottom, and we would click report. When we look at this, I could see that this resident right here, we missed the lab, and it was a standard hip, left hip, one time, so I'm guessing that was an x-ray. If I look down, I missed my 3-day bowel and bladder every 1 hour. Oh, not sure about that order. My 6 to 2 shift missed the fluid restriction, 480 amount allowed with meals, 120 amount allowed between meals. So if I look over here to the administration information, they did put in the amount with meals, but they did not put in the amount between meals. So if I ran this report and orders popped up on it that I was responsible for, I would go back and amend these orders like we talked about in our EMAR tutorial video. Amend those orders, fix them, sign them off so that this report will be blank. What we want you to do is to run this report at the end of your shift. If anything shows up on it, we need to go back and amend it, and then run this report again to verify that it is blank. Once your report is blank, you are done. The last report that a charge nurse will run at the end of their shift is the vitals report for a resident and for all of your residents on your unit. So we're going to find that one under the resident info. And if we look towards the bottom, because these are all alphabetical, we will see vitals report. I'll click next. Again, my start date, my end date would just be today. What this is going to allow me to do is look at all of the vitals. Really, we're looking at the intakes and the outputs for the residents. So really what I want to focus on here as a charge nurse is looking at the meal consumptions for my residents and making sure that if they ate less than 75%, that we documented that we offered them a meal replacement. So on this one, I would come down, I would pick my unit, and for my vital signs, I would just look at my intakes and my outputs. We don't need to mess with any of these down here except for include outpatients. We don't need that. And we do not need to include discharged. I would sort it by unit, room, and bed. And at this point, I would click report. So right here, I can look on my report, 480 mLs of fluids. My resident's breakfast was 76 to 100%, and they charted the breakfast fluids. So I'm good there. Again, breakfast, this one was 75%, and there's my fluids. My lunch was at 100%, and my fluids. Breakfast is 75%, fluids, 100% fluids. So we would keep coming down and looking through this report to make sure that none of these numbers, at least the last numbers, would be 50% or less. And again, if they are, we need to make sure that they correctly offered the meal replacement and that was documented as well. On this report, I see that all of my residents were at 100% or 75%, which means we did not have to offer that meal replacement, and that mLs had been documented with every single meal. And finally, if you are working the night shift, then you will need to run the midnight census worksheet. That report can be found, same place, facility reports, and if we look down here in the list under census, we will see a midnight census worksheet. I'll go down to the bottom, I'll click next. I could pick my unit or the entire building, the date, sort by unit, room, and bed, and then once I run this report, it would look similar to this. So 126 at this point is an empty bed. Then it has all my residents, the beds that they are in. They are in-house, which could be a check mark right here. And then any comments if I needed to write a comment about the resident. This also shows that room 134 is empty. Down at the bottom, I'd be able to see total residents in-house, on hospital leave, on therapeutic, pre-admission, occupied beds, vacant beds, total male residents, total female, total unknown, and then my signature lines for each of those categories. That is your midnight census worksheet.